Good for Saturday Night Live pieces.
Yes.
Good material.
That's right. Good evening. Welcome to a closed session of the Board of Directors of the Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District. Today is May 11th, 2017. It is 6:35 p.m. I will now take roll call as I call the meeting to order. Director Welsh?
Here.
Director Hassai?
Here.
Vice President Natoli?
Here.
I am Board President Rochelle Sherris-Watt, and unfortunately, Director Cordova will not be joining us this evening due to health concerns. We will now take public comments on items on our closed session agenda. As there are none, we will adjourn to closed session. We will return to open session at 7:30 p.m. Good evening. Welcome to the open session of the Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District. Today is May 11th, 2017. I will now take roll call. Director Welsh?
Here.
Director Hassai?
Here.
Vice President Natoli?
Here.
I am Board President Rochelle Sherris-Watt, and unfortunately, due to medical issues, like the Warriors' beloved Steve Kerr, Director Cordova will not be able to join us. We have nothing to report out tonight from closed session, and so we will move on to public comments of items not appearing on the agenda. And
Okay, thank you. I'm Carl Kruger. The Kensington Fire Protection District Finance Committee is going to meet on Wednesday, June the 6th at 5:30 in this facility. And that is the time when the fire district decides what kind of an increase it will give to El Cerrito for fire services. Ultimately, the board will confirm what the Finance Committee does, but every time I have watched it, the board has accepted the recommendation of the Finance Committee. So I'm asking if you have interest in us not overpaying any more for the services of the fire department than we have to, be at the meeting on June the 6th at 5:30 in this building. And thank you.
thank you.
How do I check?
Yeah, on this line.
A. Stevens Dilk. I want to thank and commend Ricky and Eileen for their intense time and effort approach to contacting agencies about the dispatch record services and sorting through a lot of permutations and for hopefully getting it done well before the 11th hour on June the 30th. The choice to go with Albany is apparently more costly than the other real option, which was Sheriff for dispatch, El Cerrito for records. But I think it was a fortuitous decision because if Kensington were to go with the combo, in a year or so, Sheriff Livingston would probably abort our contract when he found out that he cannot hold many ICE detainees in the annex. Perhaps El Cerrito will also contract with Albany, and we three neighbors will be on the same wavelength.
Thank you.
I'm back. New granddaughter, very happy, and her little 3 and 4th month. So thank you. Thank you, everyone, for taking care of the district. I want to make a couple of comments. The first goes to transparency. I continue to have a concern that the lack of transparency that this board has shown in various decisions that impact our community is unacceptable. It's not only inconsistent with what all of you said at the time that you ran for office, but you're making decisions that impact the lives of people in this community, one of them being who will be the next GM. We've heard very little about that. I believe, based on the things that I've read in the minutes, I haven't been here, so I don't know whether I'm interpreting them correctly, that there is a hiring decision that will come about soon. Our community hasn't had the opportunity to meet that person in any shape or way or shape. The explanation I got from the board president when I asked her in email why that was the case was basically that she did not trust the community to behave in a way that wouldn't alienate the people who were applying for the position. She cited to the last round of interviews for chief of police. In fact, she and I were in charge of that interview session. Questions were taken on cards. There was no rancor or inappropriate question asked by anybody in that audience. And I know of no one who was chased away by the idea of being interviewed by the public. But you didn't have to go that far. You could have just allowed the public to know what the process was, who the people were being considered, and to the extent that you narrowed the candidate field down, you could have given us the opportunity to meet that person before he or she is retained by this board. In a community like ours, which is not Oakland and is not San Francisco and is not El Cerrito, where people are actively involved and care about their community, to have 4 people, because we haven't had Ms. Cordova here for going on 9 months now, making a decision that impacts the lives of 5,000 without ever vetting this person in our community is unacceptable in my mind and unprofessional. So that's my first comment. My second has to do with what's going to happen once this GM is hired, what the board intends to do with respect to filling the chief of police position, how the board intends to pay the salary of the GM. None of that has been clarified, as far as I can tell, with the community. And again, I think we're entitled to know that. I think we're entitled to know whether the chief of police position will be opened up for a posting so that we can get the best possible candidate into that position, or whether it's the intention, as has been expressed previously by this board, to not fill that position with a public candidate, but rather to allow interim Chief of Police Hull to continue without ever having the opportunity to interview him, having had the opportunity to see his qualifications, or having had the opportunity to compare him to other candidates. So I hope that this board will honor the promises of transparency that you made earlier in your campaigns, that you repeatedly make to the public, and give us what we're entitled to, which is openness and information about what your intents are. Finally, the ad hoc committee spent a lot of time and energy and some money of our community studying various options for the reconfiguration of our district. It appears that you've adopted the GM split, which I support. I don't know what's happened with the other things, though. Contracting out and consolidation. There's been no discussion by this board as to how you intend to pursue or not pursue either of those options. Instead, we see what appear to be efforts by the board to position the community so that we end up contracting out, even though there has been no indication from the public that they support that. So I'm going to say again, I urge you to have public discussions about these issues that affect the day-to-day lives of your constituents. If you consider yourselves to be responsible politicians or responsible members of our community, then act like it. And I continue to find it unbelievable that this board has not made any effort to disclose to the public what the time frame is for the 5th director to return to this board. To continue to tell us that there is a medical condition that prevents her from being here, to continue to have a board that only has 4 people making decisions for a community of 5,000 is, again, inappropriate and unprofessional. So I really hope that you will consider that, consider what the alternatives are. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, my name's Gretchen Gilfillan. I've lived in Kensington for 58 years. When I retired in 1995 from teaching 4th and 5th graders, I was immediately appointed to be on the brand-new park committee. I was thrilled because I'm a big outdoors person. I'm very concerned that the fire board wants to build a new fire station on parkland. I consider my parkland. I think the fire board should consider raising the building that they have now so it's higher, enlarging it so they can get bigger fire engines in it, but not taking over parkland. The voters voted overwhelmingly to buy that land without the idea that part of it would be used for a fire station. Please listen to my plea.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right, we'll turn to board and staff comments. Any comments from board members? No? Okay,
Well, I have one.
go ahead.
I appreciate the comments you made, Pat. I do think we are very much need to hire a general manager, and at this point, we don't have time for the public vetting. So I do support, I would like to have been able to take more time and get more vetting and that kind of thing, but right now, I think it's something we can't afford to wait on. The other thing is, I do think something more needs to be said about why Ms. Cordova can't make it to these meetings. It has been a very long time, as Pat Gillette points out, and I think we need to get a more detailed explanation from her about why she can't attend these meetings.
All right. I would like to,
Pardon me, Madam President. I would like to make one comment, if I may.
please, oh, yes.
I've been in the process of reviewing your policy and procedures manual. I'm sorry, is that better? I've been in the process of reviewing the policies and procedures manual and the other governing documents of the district, and there's one hole that I propose that I should fill sooner rather than later. I know that the district has a number of code enforcement matters that it has to undertake, and commonly one would develop an ordinance that would enable you to recover attorney's fees. There's a way you have to structure the code enforcement proceedings to allow that, but it's a big cost saver, and I recommend that we look into it by the board directing me to draft such an ordinance and bring it back for your consideration.
Wonderful. I think, thank you, Ms. Danforth. I think that the board would like you to do that. If we can offer direction at this time, I think that would be great. I want to just mention that this weekend is the Kensington School Carnival, and our officers will be appearing. So if you get a chance to stop by the school from 11 to 3. And in this building, I know Gretchen would like you to know that the Friends of the Library sale is happening. So all day on Saturday, excuse me, the 13th. So the next Finance Committee meeting, where if you don't get enough of the budget here this evening, will be here Wednesday, May 24th. Always a good time. Any further staff comments? All right, then, we move on to item 6, the consent calendar. Are there any items that we would like to pull for discussion? Yes, Mr. Kruger?
Item B.
B, all right. All right, I just have comment on item A, the Kensington Community Council calendar. This is also essentially part of our correspondence, and I just want to mention that approval, the motion to approve that will occur later does not imply that we are approving or offering the dates in the Kensington Community Council calendar. There are some dates there for meetings and occurrences at this building that may be in conflict, unfortunately, with future activities. So we just can't offer a guarantee, just to clarify. But on to the unaudited profit and loss report that appears on page 6.
Okay, I'm talking about item 518. 518 is on page 7 if you took it off the board agenda. And it's on page 4 if you kept it from the Finance Committee, because they're different pages. The item is 518, and we have a minus expenditure. How did we end up with a minus expenditure for April? It's safety
Equipment. I can read the notation if that is helpful. The notation states that the monthly allowance is $1,000, but when our CPA, Ms. Russell, ran a report in March, she discovered that an officer had submitted $2,000 requests for reimbursement. Under our MOU, only one of those requests was allowed, and so the negative entry reflects the officer's reimbursement to the district.
May I make a correction? The monthly allowance is not the $1,000. That was the monthly entry for the month. It reflected a reimbursement from an officer.
I have a question.
Is it not clear? No. Okay. Each officer.
You just need to use the mic.
Are you going to take the mic away from me?
I don't have to. They told me I have to. Okay, each officer is allowed a reimbursement. This is for safety equipment. Is that $250 a year? Am I on the same page? Okay, so $250 a year that can, if they don't use it in the first year, it can go the length of the contract. So someone had the ability to spend or to be reimbursed for $1,000, but submitted a request twice. When I was preparing the reconciliation for safety equipment, I realized there was an error. It had been paid twice. We requested a refund, and that's what the credit is.
I have a question about this. We went through a process where I thought we had an understanding that the district has an obligation legally to provide all the safety equipment that our officers need, whether it's guns or safety vests or whatever. So I guess my question would be, what could we be reimbursing them for in the safety equipment vein that we wouldn't be obligated to provide them anyway, cost-free?
My understanding is that it's part of the MOU and a negotiated benefit. I believe that you provide the equipment they need on the street, but in addition, if they want to have an extra gun or something, they can use that allowance for that. You could talk, I mean, that would be beyond me as far as what they use it for.
It's also spent on boots and different items, a backup duty gun or a different belt, or if an officer wants a different vest than the one that the district is providing. There are some vests that are skinnier and lighter that most of the older officers will consider.
Well, I just would like to go on record saying this makes me very nervous. It is our legal obligation to provide all of the safety equipment the officers need, and for it to be cost-free, regardless of what the MOU might say. And I'm not really talking to you, Debbie, I'm just saying, in general, I think that we need to, especially when we renegotiate the next contract, we need to take that stuff out, and we need to make sure we are providing every single thing the officers need for safety, cost-free, because that's the law.
Thank you.
Is there any question that we are not providing what's required by law? I think we are, I think it's kind of two, right? So we may be providing everything we're required to provide, but they have the ability to purchase additional things. So if the concern is that we're not providing what must be provided, is there any question that that's a problem?
No, that is not a problem. Everything that required by the law, the district does provide.
All right, any further items on the consent calendar? If not, then I move that we accept the consent calendar.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Opposed? No, motion passes 4-0. We now move on to matters of new business. The board will appoint a director to negotiate a lease with the Kensington Fire Protection Board for office and parking space at 217 Arlington Avenue. Our lease for space within the public safety building expires July 1st, and the fire board would like to begin discussing terms. And so the board needs to nominate a director to do so.
I would nominate you, President Sheriff Watt. I think you've already been having some discussions, and it would make sense to me, anyway, for you to continue to have those discussions.
And I'll second that nomination.
All right, we'll need public comment. We have to make room for public comment unless Director Hasai would like to
No, I will.
nominate herself or
Thank you.
nominate her. Any public comment on the matter?
Hi, Linda Lipscomb. On this topic more broadly, I'm sure that whoever negotiates the contract is going to do a good job. Ideally, a general manager would be the person negotiating it. As I have said in the past, the job of the board is to set forth policy and to kind of oversee that policy is being implemented by staff. And I find it somewhat neglectful that proper staff has not been chosen at this point to do that. On the issue of the lease itself, whoever negotiates this, I urge you to keep in mind that the $1, that the $1 per year lease of the public safety building, wherever that may be, should be continued. The reason for that is that the taxpayer is on both ends of the deal. The taxpayer should not be paying on the one hand, so that's the police end, so that it flows into the fire district, which is looking to buy a $10 million Taj Mahal fire station at this point, so that that money then flows over to be a subsidy to our neighboring community. We are currently paying to our neighboring community, and it's not their fault. This is what the contract says. We're paying them about 30% of their fire budget. That's right. Usually people can't, I can talk just like this. Do you need me to talk into the microphone? You need it, right? Okay. Currently, Kensington's 5,000 taxpayers are subsidizing, that is to say, they are paying approximately 30% of the city of El Cerrito's fire budget. I don't need to tell you about the difference in geography. I don't need to tell you that the city of El Cerrito is about 5 times bigger. Now, that's just the way it is. That's the arrangement we have. On top of that, however, we are carrying the cost of the 3rd fire station for the system of the city of El Cerrito, and about 40% of the calls that come out of this fire station go to our neighboring city. It bespeaks a larger problem. We have been going along as 2 districts. We're really one people, one taxpayer base, and we should start acting like it. I think the ultimate solution for that is the consolidation of the 2 districts into a public safety and welfare district that has one revenue stream and then decides what services it's going to supply to the taxpayer. I know it's complicated, I know it takes a long time, but right now, and for many years, we've had a kind of internecine warfare where the fire district has its funds and the police district has its funds, and never the twain shall meet, and somehow the taxpayer gets lost in all that, and these inequities arise. If you're going to renegotiate this lease for the police department, it should continue to favor the citizen taxpayer and be a $1 per year lease, because the taxpayer is on the paying end of both sides of the districts, of both sides of the services. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further comments? All right. A motion has been presented, and so I will take the vote. All in favor of myself negotiating the lease with the Kensington Fire Protection Board, say aye.
Aye.
Yes.
Noes. The motion passes 4-0. All right, we're now moving on to item 8. The board will review a contract between the district and interim GMCOP Ricky Hull for a contract appointment from May 18th through June 30th, 2017. This is page 19 of the agenda. Chief Hull, I don't know if you would like to stay or go for the for the discussion. All right. If you did not get an updated contract, an updated employment agreement, we reposted, and this is apologies of PLG and myself, that item 1, in the second sentence, Hull is currently Master Sergeant. That is changed, of course, to Interim General Manager, Chief of Police. And item 5, KPPCSD has not recently hired a new general manager. It says in the process of retaining if I have the new, if the new copy is, if I'm quoting correctly. No, I'm fine. I'm fine, thank you. All right, comments from the board or the public regarding this item?
I just want to know what the plan is. We're extending this until the end of June, as I understand it. What's the plan at the end of June? Can someone answer that instead of you guys just sitting there staring into space? Can you please tell us what the plan is?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, happy to. At the last meeting, if you were able to attend or heard, we had Bob Dice come and speak to you about our process and general manager candidates. So we are in negotiations with our selected candidate, whom we would like to present at an upcoming meeting. And we had hoped to bring that person into the district as of June 12th. But, well, ideally, it would have been May 18th. But due to certain difficulties, we haven't been able to do that. So we propose to extend interim general manager, chief of police Hull's contract at first through June 12th, but for safety for the district until the end of the current fiscal year so that we have flexibility. As you will see, upon hiring of a new general manager, Chief Hull will no longer serve in that capacity. So that was the contract and solution that the board worked in conjunction with our employment attorney, John Holtzman. So at that point, our general manager would hopefully be coming aboard, and then we would present a new contract for a chief of police, or interim chief of police, however.
I would just like to add, it's kind of my understanding that once the new GM is on board, we would work with that person to get the best advice about how to proceed on the police chief issue, whether that means retaining Chief Hull or doing a search for a competitive application process, whatever. But I personally don't think we can engage in that kind of process until we have a general manager in place, and that person's had a little bit of time to get his or her sea legs.
So I apologize for asking another question, but is it possible then that we will not have an open process for the selection of the chief of police after the GM? Is that going to be left to the GM to decide? Is the board going to decide that? And if so, when are you going to make that decision? If the GM doesn't start until the middle of June, I think you said, under the best of circumstances, then we still have only 2 weeks to make a decision about what happens with the chief of police position. So I again say, what's the plan? And why wouldn't we be, if this is a board decision, not a GM decision, then why isn't the board talking about what you plan on doing to fill the chief of police position? I just don't understand it.
Oh, the way I conceive of it anyway is that this current contract extension we're considering now will run out about 2 weeks after we hire the GM. We will have to do another interim contract to extend Chief Hull as simply as police chief while we get the new general manager on board, work with that general manager to figure out exactly what the process will be for a police chief. I, for one, would love to hear comments from the community about how we should go about that. At least at that point, we won't be under the pressure we're under now. We'll have all of the expertise in place we need, and we can, take enough time to make a good, reasoned decision and get whatever input we can from the community on it. At least that's the way I conceive of it.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure. No, it's fine.
Has the board done any evaluation of interim Chief Hull's performance during this period of time that he's been in his position? And before renewing him for additional periods after June 30th, which, by the way, I told you would happen in December when you did this the first time. I do like to be right. But will there be some type of evaluation that you will do? I understand that it can't be public, of how well he's doing as the chief of police, interim chief of police, before you renew his contract for another 2, 3, 4, 6 months. That seems like it would be the right thing to do for the police officers, for the people who work in the department, and for the community, before we commit to more time with someone who was never properly vetted.
Well, I disagree with the never properly vetted. I believe that 19 years on our force was proper vetting. And we are always in process of evaluating our employees. I believe that, like Len said, we're going to be making decisions in terms of staffing for every role in conjunction with the general manager. So we will be considering what we need to do. By law, we are not required to have a chief of police. We are required to have a general manager, as you all know. But clearly, for ease of operations, we're not expecting our GM or an officer to take over. We do need leadership and direction for our police department. And I, for one, have been very impressed with Chief Hull's performance during his tenure in this role. He stepped in. We were in a lot of tumult, and he has ably guided us through the very thorny issue of dispatch, which, as we know from what's happened to El Cerrito, could have been very dire financially for the district. So we are in position to go forward, and we've gotten a piece of the puzzle in terms of operating our police operating systems established, which will hopefully lead to other decisions that bring innovation and update to our department.
I'd like to just add to those comments, which is in the time that I've worked with interim Chief of Police Ricky Hull, I have been very impressed with his work attitude, and he has made himself available. Also, he's run a department that is 3 officers short, which is a department that has been going on for too long with a deficiency in officers. And I think it's commendable to him that we have managed to be as successful as we have with such a skeleton crew. I also have seen how he has been well regarded by various chiefs of police around the area and complimented by them when we have gone to dispatch, and it's a sincere compliment. And as I mentioned quite some time ago, when we met with Fire Chief Lance Maples, as we left that meeting, Lance said that Ricky had then spent more time than the 2 predecessors combined in Lance's office. I think that's very important, more than ever before, that we have good relationships with our nearby communities on policing, because we are interdependent when we need extra help. So I think Chief Hull has done a very admirable job of keeping the balls up in the air and not letting one fall.
I would like to say that one thing I've always said is that actually the most important position for the KPPCSD is actually the general manager. If you look at the requirements, the responsibilities, and the need to run all aspects of the services we provide. And so I think it's going to be a period of transition for the entire community to realize that we're going to have a general manager who is going to be a separate and distinct role, and is going to have important responsibilities, including oversight, direct operational oversight of the police department. And so that's going to require a recalibration of the role that the board plays. I think it was Linda who pointed out we should be in a more of a policy setting and policy-making role rather than operational. And so there's going to be a period of transition of several months, I expect, while the new general manager comes up to speed, and we, benefit from the experience of that individual. So that includes how we proceed on items related to the leadership of the police department.
Leonard Schwartzberg. Was the gentleman who was here, who's assisting the board with recruiting a general manager, is his name Dice?
Yes, Bob Dice.
Bob Dice. Mr. Dice was here the last meeting, and Pat, I hope that you feel reassured by what I'm going to say. I was very, very impressed with his professionalism, his demeanor, and I feel that the board has brought in a really good person to help us recruit someone who, or perhaps several people among which we can choose. And I think that we're going to get a good general manager out of this. As a matter of fact, I wonder if Mr. Dice would consider the job. He's quite a guy, and I really admired him, and I think you guys did a really good thing in bringing him in. It's a very professional approach to finding the person that we really need. So thank you for that. And Pat, I sincerely hope that maybe that helps some, because I think you're concerned. Pardon? I wish he were, but I think he will recruit good people for us.
All right.
I'd like to make a motion.
Please do so.
I move that we adopt the First Amendment to the Interim General Manager and Chief of Police Employment Agreement as posted in the board agenda.
I will second that motion, fighting Eileen for the ability to do so. She wanted to jump in because she's worked so closely with Ricky on dispatch, I know, but I also want to believe this is the right choice for us at the moment.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Aye. All right, the motion passes 4-0. Thank you, Chief Hull, for agreeing to lead our motley crew for at least a little while longer. Now we move on to item 9. The board will review the financial statements and independent auditor's report for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2016. This was prepared by La Morena and Chang. This is on page 28 of the agenda. I will mention that at the April 26th Finance Committee meeting, the Finance Committee recommended and approved the audit. It approved the audit and recommended that the board do so as well. All right, would anyone like to comment? All right, any explanation or confusion? I'm happy to talk. Otherwise, we will. I don't want to leave anyone without.
A. Stevens Dilk. No prepared comment. I would just like to say that on the auditor's report, you'll see that for the, I think it's 448 revenue, which is franchise fee, he or she had listed 59,559. On the unaudited KPPCSD report for the end of the year, it's 92,717. That $33,000 difference is because of the franchise fee that comes in from Bayview to the district and then has to be paid to Contra Costa. This is a new thing that came up when we got the new contract. It used to be that Bayview paid the district 2% gross receipts, paid the county 3%. Now, it all comes to the district and goes out. I am not an accountant. When I was in high school, I had a choice of taking a vocational curriculum, which would be shorthand and bookkeeping, or I could take an academic one, which would be science and mathematics. And I chose to take the academic one. I actually like numbers, but I'm not very good at bookkeeping. But I have looked up a term that Debbie has just in the footnote of the April unaudited report, has pointed out that the minus $9,000 and some dollars on franchise fee represents contra revenue, C-O-N-T-R-A revenue. So I'm not an economist, so I didn't know what contra revenue was. I knew what revenue was, and I knew what contra was. So I actually looked it up, and it is a term, all right? It means revenue that comes in and turns around and has to go back out. And it's normally done when Company A sends money to Company B, and then Company B has to send some of the money back to Company A for one reason, return goods, etc. I don't think it's meant to be when money comes in from Company A to Company B, and Company B sends it to Company C. It's my understanding that that does not fit the term contra revenue. But in any case, a contra revenue is usually set up in a contra revenue account, which is in fact an expense account. The two net out. And so without the footnote, each time that negative number shows up, you don't know how much money the district got from Bayview and how much it had to send to the county. So I've requested that each month that be in, that's getting into the budget thing, but it goes back to so that at the end of the year, you don't have a $33,000 gap between what the district has said would be the revenue and what the auditor finds out. Didn't state that very well. But contra revenue, I love it.
Okay, first thing I would like to say is I don't prepare that. Those aren't my product. That comes from the staff. But contra revenue is a real thing, and I think that I'm looking to implement something that Jim Watt suggested and show, we'll just have a sub-account where we'll show all the gross revenue and show it going back out. Contra revenue is a revenue account, not an expense. It's a negative revenue account. It's meant to be up in the revenue section. And that is where the auditor is going to look for the funds coming in. So I think we can make that more clear for everybody. I think part of the reason there was such a big adjustment at the end of the year was it was new, and we were, at year end, I'm trying to accrue what was going to be received still. We were having difficulty, we still have difficulty getting a figure from the garbage company, but we had to accrue both the receivable for the revenue and then what we would pay out. So there was, but I think there's an attempt now to do it, clear it out each month. So if I set up a separate account, I'll recategorize it so everybody can see it.
And of course, that depends on when you get it. I saw some where the check came in on the last day of the month, so there's nothing you can do about that.
Oh, of course, and it's also lagging. So that's the thing, at year end, which we're coming upon, we might not receive the money that's for fiscal year, we're in 16-17, we may not receive that till September or something
it lags a little bit. So then I will accrue it to be in the proper year, but it won't hit cash at that time.
There shouldn't be that much of a lag.
Well, I'm not sure, maybe they're better. I don't know what the actual timing is. I just know that we have to accrue.
The ones that I looked at recently were coming in generally towards the end of the month, but one that I did see, and of course Christmas could explain it, came in on December 31st of last year.
But coming in at the end of the month for the prior month? See, we don't know, I don't know what their cutoff is. I don't know when they're.
The contract says that Bayview will pay every month by the end of the month for the gross revenue from the preceding month.
Okay.
I think you should set it up as when the money comes into the district, not when in terms of the month that the garbage was picked up or anything like that.
Well, it has to be, so we'll get a check at the end of July that'll be meant for June receipts.
Right.
We will pick that up as 1617, and it will be a receivable. The revenue will be recorded in the right year, as well as the money that we owe back out as a payable.
So bottom line is, we didn't do anything wrong after that 10-minute discussion.
Jim Watt, I just can't resist this one. Del came up to me and told me about this new term, contra fund. I said, Del, it makes absolutely perfect sense. After all, it's going to Contra Costa County.
Touche.
All right, to prevent any more jokes, we will make, no, I'm teasing. Can we have we'll make a motion that we, excuse me, I'm going to move to the point in the agenda, that the board accept the independent auditor's report for the fiscal year ending in June 2016, prepared by La Marina and Chang.
You want to turn, Eileen, or shall I second?
Go ahead.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Aye. The motion passes 4-0. And thanks again, Mr. Chang appeared at the Finance Committee meeting to discuss the independent auditor's report. Moving on to item 10, our final item of the night, we are reviewing the budget. This is a first reading of the budget for the fiscal year 2017-18. It is on page 66 of the agenda. But we'll let General Manager Hull, do you want to speak to the budget? This is a first pass. The Finance Committee has had 2 looks at it, and they will look at it one more time, but it will, of course, come back to the board again before final approval in June. Do you want to speak to anything? Nothing specific, just a...
Well, I didn't have anything specific to say about this budget, but I did request that the accountant show up in case there were any concerns.
All right, do we have any questions? I have one issue I'd like to bring before the board, which is items in our, let me find the page number actually before I process. So if Jim, if you would like, or do Mr. Watt would like to speak? There it is. Okay.
Jim Watt, I was told that this sign here is specifically for me because
No, not at all. It's for everyone. Dr. Delk has been helping us understand how the microphones work. And a lot of times what happens is if someone's away from that microphone, you can't hear them. And we might be able to hear them, but in the audience, people don't hear them. So the idea was to let people know try to speak into the center of that microphone as opposed to having it down where you can't really hear the person. Yeah. But for you, Jim, what we ask is when you start getting really, really, really excited about the numbers, you stand back.
Yeah, I've been told that. Well, actually, I'm a little surprised that this is coming to the board right now because I thought that the process was one of the Finance Committee approves it and then it comes to the board. However, here we are to talk about it, so let's talk about it. The Finance Committee has met and discussed this on 2 occasions, and the revisions from the last meeting that we had are contained in the packet. It was the first time that I have seen those. It appears that the revisions that we discussed at that meeting were indeed included, so from that standpoint, everything looks okay. But here are the things that I would like to make sure that you understand from the finance perspective, because I certainly intend to get into more of a discussion on that at our finance meeting. And this is for Debbie, too. We primarily went through the code, the various coded line items, but there are some important numbers that I think we need to talk about as a finance committee, and then, of course, you as the board, that were not really covered in any great detail, if at all, at the finance meeting. And the first one that I wanted to point out, and I'd asked Debbie to take a look at this, and I had intended, Debbie, to actually send you an email along these lines, thinking that the next time to talk about this would be that May 24th finance meeting. The first one is that on page 13 of your report, this particular, at the very down near the bottom there, you'll see a line item called Cash Carryovers 2016-2017. And what this line item is...
Sorry, page 69 of the agenda.
Oh, yes, I have the one from the finance packet, I'm sorry.
4th from the bottom.
Yes, sorry about that.
Sure.
And in fact, now this number may have changed because, yes, I was taking my notes from the finance meeting. On the cash carryover, I have a number that shows $1,829,000, but I believe that number has been revised downward a little bit.
That's the number,
Oh.
1,829,958.
$1,829,958. Yes, okay, all right, then we've got the same number here. I just want to point out that what that number is supposed to represent is the amount of money that we should have in our reserves in total as of this coming year ending 2017. And I want to point out that in the audit that you just approved, that audit showed that that number as of the previous year was $1,801,000. So what I'm taking away from this is that this cash carryover has increased by approximately $28,000 over what was in the audited results. If in fact that is the case, then I think that number that was derived, obviously not from an audit, but from looking at the budget and trying to anticipate how much money would carry forward, very likely understates the amount of money that will indeed be carried forward. And at the finance meeting, I passed around a little spreadsheet in which I gave my best approximation as to how much money we should show on the bottom line for the end of this coming fiscal year on June 30th. And that was $171,000 of, we'll call it, profit. So if in fact we have now increased our cash amount by 171, then I believe that number shouldn't be 1,829,000, but should be 1,972,000. Now this is very important because you're going to hear, as we discuss this in some detail, or the board does, that there's concern here that we're going to have a lot of expenditures coming forward, and therefore knowing having a good accounting for how much money we really and truly do have on hand is critically important for understanding how much money how deeply we can dig into that reserve account. So I would ask that you take a look at that.
I actually have a comment.
All right.
This year is So that cash carryover is not the exact same as fund balance, but it should be something close. And he's right that we have an increase, and he thinks we should have a bigger increase. And I would like to draw your attention to the next line, which says add back large prepaid RIMS software. So if you look at the sheet that is on page 71, of course, when I do this, it's the end of February numbers, so I'm estimating quite a bit. And so I'm just assuming what we normally spend in a month, and then in June, I allow for anything extra that we know about. And one of the big items is about $140,000 that we're going to spend on RIMS software. But it's important to note that that's going to be a prepaid. It isn't going to be recorded as an expense until fiscal year 17-18. So it's going to drop our cash, and to not be misleading, I added it back because it in fact shows in the expenses. It will have already been paid for with cash, so I don't want to duplicate the loss of cash. So if you look at 1829 plus the almost 140,000, I think you're going to be very close to the number you're looking for. I think I don't have a calculator with me, but I think that it's going to be something close to 1960 or something if you add these two together.
Let me think about this.
That's fine. Because what you're,
I'll email you.
okay, what you're
I hear
looking,
what you're saying.
what you're looking at is the profit, which does go in, that's how we typically change that account. But this number is actually cash, and we're going to have spent cash. But it'll show up again in this year's budget as an expense, so I want to add it back because it's been falsely duplicated.
Can I just ask, because I know that we have the franchise fees that are restricted, so this does not include those, right?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
So what I really think we need to do is to understand what's, with this cash, what's really available.
Or yours?
Maybe you pull it from me.
Okay, maybe it is mine. Okay, so we had a discussion at the Finance Committee about this reserved money, and I think the best thing you can see is that at the bottom of the page and going into page 70 are the restricted items that we want to annotate, that to say that all the money that's in that carryover is not truly available for anything. However, the Finance Committee discussion really pointed out that there are quite a few other things that are restricted, and by trying to break out just that one, it implies it's the only one, and it gets pretty messy. So I think somebody was going to maybe do some work on what they wanted that to be presented like, but right now, this is the approach we've taken.
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
We had a pretty fulsome discussion about items like the franchise fee, but it does sort of devolve into things like COPS grant money, Measure G appropriation that we can only spend on policing. So Rob Furman and myself agreed to look over our budget and see if we could develop any logical way so that the first, reader would have an easy time understanding those funds that were restricted without becoming so burdensome on the staff or so in such finite detail that the budget became 17 pages long. So we're working on the issue, but we understand the concern.
The next one that I wanted to make sure that we talked about at the Finance Committee, but I think it's important for this board discussion, is that for a long time we have held a capital account for automobiles. In the La Mirada Chang report, the amount of money that was sitting in that account was $128,000. I know that Debbie has an explanation for this, but for whatever reason, in this committed funds section for capital projects vehicle fund is 101,000, not 128. And I know there's an explanation for that. But my real point is not necessarily the difference between the 101 and the 128, as it is that we have talked about it at the Finance Committee. It has been suggested that it come to this board, and this board take action, whatever action they need to take, to make sure that that fund that has long been sitting over there for vehicle purchases gets redesignated back into the general fund, because it seems to serve no real useful purpose, and it doesn't show us that in fact we have this extra $128,000 truly available to us. So was it going to go back to the?
Thank you. Okay, first time with this microphone. Okay, so the 128 is basically cash and investments. The 101 is the investment portion, and there's a little bit of cash in the capital fund. So the capital fund is a separate fund from the general fund, and you'll see it in the financial statements broken out. In fact, we're not required to have a capital fund, and at this point, it has almost no activity and seems to serve no purpose. I think it was set up so that there would be a car purchased every year from it. Clearly, that hasn't been for a long time. So it is, I believe by a vote of the board, you could cancel the capital fund and just have one fund, the general fund, plus our fiduciary ones that we have with the park bond, and that wouldn't go away.
All right. Yeah, so I hope the board will take that under consideration, because again, it will make your general fund larger than it would appear otherwise.
Correct, but we do include that cash here, I think you'll see, but we note that it's
committed.
You're right.
Yeah, and that's the
So
problem. It shouldn't be committed. Right.
That is.
All right. The other
actions
thing that we talked about at our finance meeting, and that I think is critically important here, is that there have been a number of people in the community that have expressed concerns that this district has not adequately planned for the redoing of this building. And so we've had some discussions at our finance meeting as to the importance of putting together some sort of an outline as to the amount of money that we estimate, and it's going to be a real ballpark guesstimate, I know, but it's better than nothing, of what it's going to cost and where these funds are going to come from, and start to set aside those reserves. And I know I've talked to Sylvia about this. So we were hoping that by our next finance meeting, we would get such an outline with a request, presumably from Sylvia, as to the amount of money that needs to be additionally set aside into a committed fund. Right now, we have in our community center building upgrade fund of committed funds $150,000. And we have also budgeted for the year 17-18 $250,000. So the 150, the 250, we have $400,000 currently committed for the upgrade of this building. But I'm not trying not to get excited here, but we all know that this building is going to cost more than that. So we would like to see that, so that we're going to be moving forward here at some point, I hope, with a 5-year plan, and I think that would be an important issue to take a close look at. So those were the primary things that I just wanted to bring to your attention, because I do think that you will find that the amount of money that you will still have in reserve, even after increasing the amount of money for this building, will still remain quite possibly above $1 million, which I think is a very comfortable amount given the expenditures that you're going to have to set aside. Thank you.
I also just want to remind folks that there's a WW grant worth $158,000 that we also can apply toward this building.
Probably a small item, Linda Lipscomb, probably a small item, but I When we were doing the work, when I was previously on the board, when we were doing the work on the contract for the garbage, for the waste, solid waste, it always confounded me about the limitations for the use of the fees. And I was a proponent of allocating a portion of those fees for staff time, for attorney time, and other aspects of the use of our district facilities that go towards solid waste disposal, just in terms of, for whatever is in that fund, for trying to free it up for use by the community should we need it. Because as it is now, it kind of sits there, accumulates, and accumulates. And it may be put to good use. So that might be a matter for council to dig into a bit, no pun intended, and find out the reasonable definition of what related expenses are.
Linda, you must have ESP because I sent an email to Ann this afternoon.
Oh, it's bothered me for years.
So, I agree. I agree. And actually, I've mentioned that before, and, well, oh, there you are. Dave Spath had talked about it, too. We've talked about it, and we're trying to see. And the other option that we're trying to figure out is, once we understand how much we might need for a new RFP and new attorney negotiations, can we lower that franchise fee? So we're trying to figure all that stuff out. But as to what use we might be able to put it to, I mean, for example, to me, it's straightforward that any cost for any removal, debris removal from this building, that should be an allowable expense, and so, yeah.
Bayview is the only.
To the extent the district is paying that, I mean, I don't know if that's wrapped into the contract already, but certainly for professional fees, that accounting fees, attorney fees, staff time.
Right.
everything together,
Right.
A reasonable allocation.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And there is no contract yet for the work, so that could certainly be put in, but under the franchise agreement, Bayview has the exclusive right to all debris. Kind of, I guess they might be proud of that, but anyway, they have the exclusive right, so we could, that's going to be in the contract, and I don't see why we can't have that.
I've looked into that. It won't be a significant amount of money, but approximately, on these very, very ghost estimates, maybe $10,000 of debris removal. But since they are
Right.
the exclusive hauler, that would be an
Yeah.
absolutely perfect use for that money.
Yeah, I wouldn't think that would be a lot, because there's not going to be doing that much demo, but there may be some more demo of the public safety building, and maybe that's an option for that money to be used. But, it all depends on what we can do. Yeah, thank you.
Since you mentioned you've asked our attorney to take a look at this, I'll forward you the email that I received from a name from the past, Chief Harmon, about 3 years ago, in which I asked this very question, and he pointed out to me that they had gone to legal counsel, and it had been determined that that money could only be used for the purpose for which it was intended, which was the garbage collection.
Right, and then I understand that was a Hanson Bridget memo, and I've written to Hanson Bridget, and they won't respond to me, but they said if they find it, find a copy of it, they'll send it over to the general manager, because the general manager was the client, not a director, so we don't have that legal memorandum. But I don't know, Dave, if some of the propositions that you brought to my attention were done after that time, but in any event, we have a competent counsel, and so we can take a look at that.
I'm Clark Kruger. I have two problems with this budget, and I have expressed both of these items at Finance Committee. I think it's important for the community that we address this. It's not going to help me make friends, but I think it is important. We did not take a vote at Finance Committee, and I was sort of disappointed that we didn't. I would have not voted for it. I would not vote for a budget that authorizes more than $1 rental fee to the fire department. I feel that the safety building is our building. It belongs to this community. It does not belong to the fire department. They don't pay rent when they come in here, and I will definitely not support anything that is more than a single dollar per year for the space that we occupy there. The other thing is, Larry, it's easy for me to make friends. The other thing is, we have talked about hiring a part-time general manager, but we have never talked about creating an 11th position, not counting the office workers. And what this budget says is that we will have 11 positions. We have not increased in population in this community, and we have not added any additional buildings. I don't see how we create another position and how we were justified creating another position. And what we have is, we have 10 positions on this sheet for the police officers, and we have an 11 position on the district, which is item 808 and 809. When I expressed my feeling on this at Finance Committee, I did not get support for this. I didn't feel like, I didn't get any verbal support for this. And we talked about it for a while, but we got sidetracked. We talked about absenteeism, and we talked about some code that police officers use when they are on modified duty, but we never talked about the issue as to how we justify having an 11 position. And again, the Finance Committee does not need my vote in order to bring it to the board. What I'm saying is that I will not vote for an 11 position. What I might be willing to do is, if we bring in a part-time general manager, who at that point will have operational responsibility, if this general manager, either he or she, could make an argument for why we, at least for a certain time, need an additional whatever, part-time position, then I'm willing to listen to this. But other than that, I will not support an 11 position, whether anybody else on Finance Committee does or not. Thank you.
I just want to say I think that's a perfectly appropriate task to assign our new general manager when he or she comes in. That's exactly the kind of analysis we need from somebody who is going to bring to bear expertise and a fresh set of eyes.
And as you know, I'm very reasonable. I would listen to that.
And also, I want to say that I think you're probably going off of the Finance Committee one. There's been changes since then, and account 865 says $1 for the rent.
But that's not been negotiated. That was
Agreed.
a Finance
Agreed.
Committee.
But it doesn't say more
Yes,
than that
that's
at this
correct.
point.
It's been changed, Debbie. You were not at the last Finance Committee.
No, I changed it at direction to $1.
That was our agreement at the last Finance Committee meeting. I should say, that was the Finance Committee's decision to allot that at the time. And did you want to discuss the officer position, or should we just, it was still?
No, we only have spots for 10 officers' position. I don't understand where the 11th officer's position is coming from.
I think he's saying the 11th would be the general manager.
Okay, all right.
No, the chief is the 10th position, the 11th is the general manager, at least as I understand the argument.
Okay, understood, Carl, thank you. Thank you, okay. I do have, the item I also wanted to discuss was page 70 and the committed capital projects vehicle fund. I think that the board should decide whether or not we are going to vacate that fund or leave some amount in that category. I believe our last vehicle purchase did not come from that fund. It came from the general fund. So it would make sense either to me to make it zero if we're going to agree that we always are keeping in mind that we need to periodically repurchase cars, or to leave perhaps enough funds for the purchase of one vehicle in that fund. whatever the majority of the board feels, so.
Yeah, it might be nice to get a good sober estimate of what we anticipate to be our yearly car replacement cost. You know, might be nice to have that as sort of a ballpark thing to go by.
I believe pretty much as long as I've been here, which is a long time now, we have never purchased out of the capital fund. It's always been a general fund and was not reimbursed based on the theory that that fund was always staying to produce a new one, right, to buy a new one. So it's never been used for its correct intent.
That's weird.
I mean, it's from Pat, you know, not Pat Gillette, but Pat McLaughlin days. I mean, she's the one who used to know how it came about. I would further suggest that if you're going to vacate that, you consider vacating the whole capital fund. This is just the investment portion of that fund. There is also a cash piece, that 28,000 or 20-something thousand. And at some point, if you're not going to keep that for a purpose, consider getting rid of the fund, because it just creates extra accounting by tracking it and putting it on the audit and everything else if it's not going to serve a purpose. So I'm not saying you have to vacate it. If you do, consider vacating the whole thing.
Well, my suggestion is that we then, if we've never used it, that we just simply vacate the fund.
Yeah.
If we're in agreement, I think then we can ask Debbie to do that.
I just want to understand what you were just saying, though, about in vacating it all. Do you mean the 28 as a separate line item?
I mean, if you look at the audit, we actually have a separate government fund. So we have a general fund and we have a capital fund. That capital fund has two pieces of money. This 101,000 is basically 100,000 that's gained a little interest over time. And then there's a cash portion that's sitting with the county.
Okay.
And I'm saying,
Yes, I see. I got it. This is all related to the vehicle
well,
capital
it's
fund.
all a separate governmental fund. And if you're going to not keep the money, there would be sort of no purpose to have the fund.
So,
And I would,
so Debbie, was perhaps the purpose, the idea to have like the investment part to try to generate some revenue from that? Was that maybe why they created it?
I can't speak to that. My understanding is that it was meant to be, apparently at one time, we were going to add a new car or replace a new car and keep the fleet fresh all the time. And I'm not sure. When I came here, it was 100 in savings, and there's always been a little bit in cash.
Do we make any significant money from the investment, or is it just some money market silly rate?
I mean, it's in LAIF, so I mean, it makes what all of our LAIF money makes. It's a portion. We no longer actually can keep it separate, so I do an accounting for it, but it's point something one, a portion of a percent. It's not
Minimal, okay, got it.
It wasn't always. I mean, we had some good years, but that's not.
May I jump in for just a moment, please? First of all, can everybody hear me? Yes. Okay. I was told that I speak too softly before the meeting began, so I want to make sure. I do remember the history of the vehicle set aside. That was because when Pat McLaughlin was on the board, there was almost a practice of replacing one vehicle every year, and they wanted to make sure that they had sufficient funds in order to make that possible. I think they'd had some lean years when that had not been possible out of the operating budget, and making sure that vehicles are in excellent condition so they don't ever fail when responding to an emergency was foremost in the board's mind when it set that money aside.
All right, so do we agree that we would vacate the fund and move it? It seems, okay, then I think we'll direct Debbie to do so and make the changes in the upcoming budget. Yes, I think effective July 1st.
But I do want to have a line item or something that estimates what our annual car replacement cost is, so we don't get blindsided by that. We don't want to go in the other direction, not plan for the cost at all.
Okay, we don't replace a car annually, but if you're asking how much does a new car cost?
Well, I'm thinking maintenance and replacement together. I mean,
Well, I think we have a separate account.
We do have a line item for
It may be worth
repairs.
So, I mean, you know, we're going to have to replace them periodically, so we should sort of
And
get
we
an
have,
annual
I mean,
average for that.
We might,
It's just that we've been doing it out of the general fund. It's not that this is suggesting we would not replace cars. It would be
No.
how it's paid for.
That is a restriction, though. If we know we have that ongoing expense, it would be nice to have an idea of the annual average cost of that.
and we might do something if we, in future, in consultation with Chief Hull and the fleet manager, if we are figuring that we're replacing a vehicle every 2 years or every 3 years, that we do, as the fire board does, and set aside half or a third of that cost into that
Exactly,
fund,
exactly.
building up, so that we are not, I think it's great practice, because then we're keeping it in mind and not getting, right, another $35,000 expense. If there aren't any further comments or questions about the budget, you will see it again, I promise. You can always attend a Finance Committee meeting or make comment on it to any board member at any meeting. So if not, I will make a motion that we adjourn.
I'll
Second? No, you can have it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you so much for coming.